A church floor collapses in a quiet Dutch neighborhood. Workers move in to repair it. And then they stop, because beneath the broken tiles, something is staring back at them. A skeleton, ancient, undisturbed, buried in the holiest spot inside the church, directly beneath where the altar once stood. Beside it, a coin and a bullet. In the moment, an archaeologist who has spent 28 years searching for one specific grave is called to the scene, he goes completely silent, because he thinks he's found him. The man, the legend, the musketeer the whole world thought was just a story. If you've ever believed that history hides more than it reveals, this one is for you. Hit subscribe and stay with me, because this story gets stranger the deeper it goes. Maastricht, Netherlands, February 2026. It's an ordinary morning in the Wolder neighborhood, a quiet district on the edge of a city that has existed since Roman times. The Sint-Paulus-Kirk, the Church of St. Peter and Paul, stands here as it has for centuries. Its walls have absorbed wars, sieges, coronations, and burials going back to at least the 13th century. Nobody expects what's coming. The floor has been sinking, slowly, invisibly, until it isn't. A section of old stone tiles gives way. Repair crews are called in. Standard procedure, routine work. But the moment they lift the broken tiles, the routine ends. A grave, intact, undocumented. Deacon Jos Valk, present at that first moment, later described the atmosphere simply, "Those tiles were picked up, and that's when we actually found the bones." One phone call changes everything. The call goes to Wim Dijkman, former city archaeologist of Maastricht, independent researcher, and a man who's been petitioning this exact church for permission to excavate for nearly 3 decades. He arrives at the site. He looks at the location of the grave. He looks at the artifacts, and the hairs on the back of his neck stand up, because this is where he always believed the body would be. Let's walk through what was found, slowly, because the details matter. The skeleton lies in a tomb positioned directly in front of the altar. Not near it, not beside it, in front of it, in the precise location reserved by the customs of the era for royalty or persons of extraordinary importance. Common people were not buried here. Soldiers were not buried here. Only those whose significance demanded it. Resting beside the skeleton, a small bronze French coin, minted in 1660. French, not Dutch, not Spanish. French, in a Dutch church, in a city that was, for a moment, in 1673, under French military siege. And then there's the bullet. Fragments of a lead musket ball, found at chest level. The position is precise, almost deliberate in what it communicates. A man who was shot, and shot fatally, was buried here. The bullet that likely killed him traveled with him into the grave. The skeleton is removed carefully and transported to an archaeological institute in Deventer, in eastern Netherlands. On March 13, 2026, a DNA sample is extracted from the jawbone. It is sent to a specialist laboratory in Munich, Germany, where it will be compared against genetic material provided by living descendants of a French noble family. The family name, the Bats de Castelmour. The man, Charles, known to the world by a different name entirely. D'Artagnan. Here's where it gets complicated. For 353 years, the final resting place of Charles de Bats de Castelmour, the real D'Artagnan, has been completely, utterly unknown. No grave marker, no church record, no documentation of any kind. He was one of the most celebrated military officers in the court of Louis XIV, captain lieutenant of the king's own musketeers, and he simply vanished from history at the moment of his death. How does a man that important disappear so completely? He died on June 25, 1673, during the French siege of Maastricht. A musket ball struck him in the throat. King Louis XIV, reportedly watching from nearby, was so affected that he later wrote to the Queen that he had lost one of his best and most loyal men. A contemporary letter confirms that D'Artagnan was buried in consecrated ground. And then nothing for 3.5 centuries. No marked grave, no tomb, no record in any church archive in Maastricht. A man the king mourned publicly. A man whose death moved a monarch. buried without a trace. That silence has haunted historians for generations. And now, in a neighborhood church with a collapsing floor, something has broken that silence. But the question remains, is this really him? The evidence is striking, but striking is not the same as certain. And this is where science and history must wrestle with each other. Wim Dijkman has been careful in his language. "I'm always very cautious," he told local media. "I'm a scientist, but in the same breath, I have high expectations." To CNN, he was slightly more direct. "I'm very confident." That confidence rests on several converging lines of evidence. Theory 1, the location theory. French historian Odile Bourdas has argued since at least 2008 that D'Artagnan's body was almost certainly buried near the French military camp, rather than transported back to Paris. The reason is practical and grim. He died in June, in summer heat. Transporting a body across hundreds of miles in those conditions was not feasible. The Saint-Patru-Saint-Poliskirk sits adjacent to the site where historians believe Louis XIV royal encampment was positioned during the siege. Bourdas herself has described the church's proximity to the camp as a very logical hypothesis. Dijkman, who connected with Bourdas roughly 25 years ago, has built his decades-long search around this premise. Theory 2, the burial position theory. Deacon Vaughn, who witnessed the excavation firsthand, was direct about what the grave's position implies. Only royalty or other important figures were buried under an altar at that time, he said. When you add it all up, it seems plausible to us. A man buried here was not a common soldier. This was an individual whose companions, or whose king, deemed him worthy of the most sacred space the church could offer. Theory 3, the physical evidence theory. The French coin dated 1660 places a French individual at this burial. Not coincidentally, but specifically, the musket ball fragments at chest level align with how historical documents describe D'Artagnan's fatal wound, even though some accounts describe the shot as entering the throat. The bullet's position at chest level is consistent with the trajectory of a projectile that struck the throat and lodged in the chest cavity. What the skeptics say. French historian Odile Bourdas herself, despite years of championing this theory, has publicly maintained caution. "It is a very logical hypothesis," she told NAS. But it remains a hypothesis. French historian Jean-Christian Petitfils, who has studied D'Artagnan for 50 years, called the discovery tremendous, but acknowledged that tracing D'Artagnan's lineage for DNA matching is itself uncertain. D'Artagnan had 2 sons, but the broader lineage is not fully documented. The DNA results from Munich are expected within weeks of this discovery. They may confirm everything, or they may raise entirely new questions. Step back for a moment, because if this is confirmed, the implications extend far beyond one skeleton in one church. It means that one of the most famous literary characters in human history was not just inspired by a real man, but that the real man is now, for the first time, physically traceable, touchable, verifiable. Alexandre Dumas published The Three Musketeers in 1844, 171 years after D'Artagnan's death. He built his D'Artagnan from fragments. Apocryphal memoirs published in 1700 scattered historical references, legends passed down through generations. The fictional D'Artagnan became a global icon, brave, loyal, impulsive, larger than life. Films, plays, television series, generations of readers across every culture. But the real man? Little more than a portrait of uncertain authenticity and a handful of court records. This discovery, if confirmed, would bridge a 353-year gap between the man and the myth. It would mean that history, this whole time, had been quietly waiting beneath a church floor for someone to ask the right question in the right place at the right time. It also raises a broader, unsettling question about the nature of history itself. How many other giants of the past, figures who shaped wars, cultures, and the stories we still tell, are lying unidentified beneath floors, fields, and forgotten ground? How much of history is still underground? Richard III of England was found beneath a parking lot. Now, D'Artagnan may have been found beneath a crumbling church floor. The past does not announce itself. It waits. Think about the journey of this story. A man dies in battle. A king mourns him. A letter says he was buried in consecrated ground. And then, silence. 353 years of silence. A historian reads old texts and forms a theory. An archaeologist hears that theory and devotes decades to proving it. A church floor, weakened by centuries of time, finally gives way. Workers lift broken tiles, and what was hidden surfaces, not with drama, not with fanfare, just bones, a coin, a bullet. Wim Dijkman, standing in that church, looking at that grave, after 28 years of searching, said this was truly a top-level investigation. He said he wants to be absolutely certain, or as certain as possible. That phrase carries weight, because certainty in history is almost never absolute. We work with what survives. We interpret what remains. We construct the best version of the truth we can from fragments. But sometimes, rarely, beautifully, breathtakingly, the fragment is enough. A French coin, a lead bullet, a grave in the holiest place inside a 13th century Dutch church. 353 years later, D'Artagnan may have finally come home. Here is what I want to leave you with. If this DNA test confirms it, if the skeleton beneath that Dutch church floor is truly Charles de Batz de Castelmour, what does that do to the line between history and legend? Between the man and the myth? And here's the deeper question. How many other stories are we still living inside? Stories whose origins are buried, literally, beneath our feet? Drop your theory in the comments. I want to know what you think. If you found this story as extraordinary as I did, share it. Someone in your life needs to hear this one. And if you want more stories like this, true, strange, and stranger than fiction, subscribe. Because history never runs out of secrets.